In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. I'd like to begin by thanking the Islamic Society at Liverpool University for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. So, what I'd like to do this evening is to discuss Richard Dawkins' bestseller, The God Delusion. I know it's been out for some time now, but I still think that it's very, very relevant, since arguments are used from this book in order to support atheism. And it's very much part of this new movement known as New Atheism. Now, the question is, I think it's important to mention something on this new phenomenon, New Atheism. I think it's quite important to establish what this is. The question is, what's new about New Atheism? Well, it's nothing to do with its argumentation. Pretty much the arguments are recycled arguments from greats like Hume and Kant. What's new about New Atheism is its pernicious attitude to religion, its hunger, its desire to completely eradicate religion and God from our lives. And to understand exactly how this movement has established itself, it's important to understand the conditions of belief that the West has gone through. You see, up until the 15th century, it was intellectually and culturally impossible not to believe in God. To believe in God was necessary. God defined all aspects of reality. When man looked at the world and decided to provide a solution, God was in the background. God was always assumed. But then came stage 2 in the conditions of belief, with the Enlightenment. And for the first time, it was possible, intellectually and culturally, not to believe in God, to be an atheist. And the view of religion at that time was that religion was somewhat part of the juvenile and delinquent stage of human development. That religion was that thing that we could leave behind. It was useless baggage, and we could look forward. But now, we are in a third stage, where the conditions of belief are drastically changed. There's a seismic shift, a complete reversal of conditions. What we have is this. Where, up until the 15th century, the first conditions, it was necessary to believe in God. It was an oddity not to believe in God. It was even dangerous not to believe in God. What we have now is it is impossible to believe in God. It is an oddity to believe in God, and it is even dangerous to believe in God. And we have many atheists, like, for example, A.C. Grady, who describes religion as one of the most worst toxins, poisoning human affairs. Describes religion like a toxin. The co-atheist Christopher Hitchens compares religious believers with the plague carrying rats in Camus' the novel The Plague. Sam Harris has said that if he had two things in front of him, religion and rape, and he had a magic wand, without hesitation, he would make religion disappear, leaving rape. So you can see this kind of attitude towards religion, that it's an oddity, it's even dangerous, and using terms like the plague and toxins and so forth. So with that said, that gives us an understanding of the mindset of Richard Dawkins and the like, that this third conditions of belief has given way for this new movement known as New Atheism. So what about the arguments within the God delusion? Well, before I go into that, I want to just sort of get a feel of who's actually read the book here. Show of hands? Right, not that many. Right, okay. What I'd suggest to those that haven't read it, try and borrow a copy. Go to your library. My first impression of the book was that I was left slightly perplexed. Why? Because of the usage of the word delusion. Now, a delusion is to hold on to a belief and to hold on to believe in something even though there is invalidating evidence against it. So you have a belief, and then there's this overwhelming amount of evidence against it. But if that is the case, then why does it take Richard Dawkins 400 pages to demonstrate that? That belief in God is so patently false. It's demonstrably false. Why does it take him 400 pages to show that? We don't have people writing books debunking such things as unicorns. We don't have books called The Illusion or The End of Fairies. People writing books, spending their great amount of time debunking fairies. And my favourite, Father Christmas is not great. We don't have people writing books like this because these things do not exist. They're evidently true that their existence is false. So from the outset, it's clear that Richard Dawkins has not given the intellectual respect to this discussion of God's existence. There is a tremendous amount of discourse, scholarly discourse, about the arguments for God and against God. And I think it doesn't do any use, doesn't give us any kind of adequate position to caricature the debate. The second thing that I noticed halfway through the book is that it is evidently clear that Richard Dawkins is not a good philosopher. He is a very good writer, a very good scientist, but not a good philosopher. And it brings light to the saying that scientists make bad philosophers. And the reason for this is that we will discover this evening that what happens is that Richard Dawkins tends to go beyond the limits of his argumentation. He goes beyond the logic of his arguments. And I think that the reason that people are somehow taken in by this book is because they're not exposed to good and cogent contemporary arguments for the existence of God, and so they fall prey to clever rhetoric. So what about the argument? What about the themes for this evening? So what I'd like to do is to discuss the relationship between faith and reason, the conflict between religion and science, and lastly, Richard Dawkins' main argument against the existence of God on page 157 and 158 of the God Delusion. So, the relationship between faith and reason. Now, according to Richard Dawkins, he believes that faith teaches us that it is a virtue to believe in something without understanding, without any evidence. That faith is opposed to evidence. He says that process of non-thinking called faith. So he thinks that he has this view of faith that is completely opposed to evidence and is based on. He says faith means blind trust in the absence of evidence, even in the teeth of evidence. And he also says faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. Faith is not allowed to justify itself by argument. In that case, then how does Richard Dawkins account for the fact that so many people believe in God and follow in religion? How does he account for this belief in an era of science and reason, which has made religion and God obsolete? How does he account for that? Well, he comes out with something called the intellectual replicator, which is not so much a part of this book, but more of a selfish gene. But it's important to mention this here, because it's a running theme in his book, The God Delusion. The intellectual replicator. Now, can I ask how many of you here actually believe in God? Show of hands. Big number, right? So we're talking about maybe 95% of the individuals in this room. Now, according to Richard Dawkins, you have not looked at the evidence, felt compelled by the evidences and arguments for God's existence, being persuaded by the arguments that God exists, outweighed the arguments, assessed them, and concluded for yourselves that there is more reason to believe in God's existence. No, no, no. According to Richard Dawkins, that your mind has been infected by a highly contagious, highly adapted God. He says, just as genes propagate themselves in the gene pool by leaping from body to body via sperms or eggs, so memes propagate themselves in the meme pool by leaping from brain to brain by a process which, in the broad sense of the term, can be called imitation. God exists, if only in the form of a meme, with a high survival value or effective power in the environment provided by human culture. Something has leapt into your minds. You haven't decided that God exists, but you have been subject to this God. Right. Now, there are a couple of things that I'd like to say about this view. The first is that there is, believe it or not, no evidence whatsoever for a God view. No evidence whatsoever. Now, we have evidence for genes and viruses, but nothing for memes. So it becomes highly ironic that Richard Dawkins wants to account for the fact that so many people believe in something without any evidence, and his explanation has no evidence. Very, very ironic. But the other problem is this, that if there is a God meme, then why can't we say also that there is an atheist meme? So we say to Richard Dawkins, Mr. Richard Dawkins, you have not looked at the evidence and decided for yourself that the evidence falls on the side of atheism, and you have not debunked God's existence. No, no, no. You have been infected with a highly contagious, highly adapted atheism. Now, if Richard Dawkins says, well, no, there is no such thing as an atheist, then this whole thing is just about getting rid of ideas, conveniently getting rid of ideas that we just do not like. But having said that, what about this view of blind faith? That religion is based on blind faith, that belief in God is based on simply no evidence whatsoever. Is that true? What is true is that we should be embarrassed of such a position. Richard Dawkins, he talks in the sense of being embarrassed that people believe in something without any evidence. That is perfectly reasonable. It's an egregious thing to believe in something without any evidence. I remember that I was in a market and this chap of a particular persuasion, religious persuasion, came up to me and he had a big banner in front of him and he said, he had a message on there and he was inviting me to his religion. And I said to him, okay, that's great. I said to him, so how do you know it's true? And he said, what do you mean? Well, I said, well, how do you know this is true and something else is false? He said, he scratched his head and he said, I never really thought of that. And then I asked him, how long have you been with this particular religion? And he said, 15 years. So for 15 years, he had dedicated himself, and also would go out wearing a big banner in front of himself, inviting people to join a religion which he himself did not know that it was true. We should absolutely be annoyed with such a position. Absolutely. W.K. Clifford, the 19th century philosopher, was very critical of religion in this way. He said that anyone who believes in a religion without any evidence, it is a stolen pleasure. You have stolen that belief, you have not earned it. And we agree with this point, right? Just because I believe in something, just because I have a passion about something, it doesn't mean it's true. For example, I could start a religion called Religion X, right? I could start preaching out in the streets of Liverpool, talking to people about Religion X and how much people need Religion X and for their salvation. And I could get a number of followers day by day. More and more people could join my new religion, Religion X. We could raise money, sing songs, go to Religion X temples on Sundays, hold hands, and praise Religion X. But it would not show that it is true. It would not show that it is true. But what about this claim that religious belief is necessarily based on blind faith? Is this true? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. On the contrary, if you look at Islam, if we look at the Quran, over and over again, the verses in the Quran tease and agitate our rational faculties, tease and agitate our rational abilities. For example, let me quote to you some in Surah 3, 119, we read, "We have made our revelations clear for you. Will you not use your reason?" Surah 4, 82. "Will you not think about the Quran? If it had been from anyone other than God, they would have found much inconsistencies in it. Could there be any divine power besides God? Say, if you think so, produce your evidence if you truly believe in your claim." It is evidently clear that Islam, the Quran, doesn't ask you to base your belief on blind faith. On the contrary, other verses even condemn individuals for believing without any evidence. So I don't know which religion Richard Dawkins is referring to, but it definitely is not Islam. So we can see that we're not arguing if those evidences are true at this point. That's another discussion. What we're arguing here, what I'm saying here, is that what we can be for sure about is that Islam demands evidence. It's not based on blind faith. But I don't want to end there. I want to also show that atheism, the call that atheism makes about evidence and rationality, is self-defeating. Why? Why is it self-defeating? Let me explain. What typically follows from atheism is naturalism, that all that exists is the natural world and there's nothing beyond the natural world. And what typically follows from that is physicalism, that all that exists is a spatio-temporal system, and what exists can be understood by using our physicalist terms like physics, chemistry, biology. Now what that means is that human beings are then just physical entities, and that human beings are nothing more beyond their physicality. But the implication of that is quite difficult to handle. Why? Because that means that there is no mind beyond the brain. No mind beyond the brain. That all that our mind is our physical brain. But if that is the case, then that means what follows from that is determinism. Determinism. What do I mean by this? Look. For example, we have a rock rolling down the hill. It is determined to follow the laws of nature. It does not have a choice. It just follows the laws of nature. Right? In the same way that if we're just physical beings, then all the processes within our body are just following natural laws. Every single outcome. But what that also means is that the mental events in my mind, my brain, are also determined also. So that means the idea or the belief of atheism is also determined. It's not exclusive to that. It is also a mental event. So beliefs in general, if we're just physical beings, is nothing but like a toothache. You have no control of that, it just happens. But if that is the case, then whether I accept atheism or reject atheism is determined, then it's no longer a matter of being true or false, no longer a matter of being rational. It becomes irrational. So what we have is, on the surface, the atheist presents a situation where he wants evidence, reason. Look at the theist, he has no evidence. But when we follow his way of thinking, we end up with irrationality. It becomes self-refuting. It's no longer a position of rationality or evidence, because one doesn't choose it. It just happens like a toothache. What we have so is that evidence and reason do support religion and faith. That faith can be based on evidence and reason. And not only that, atheism can also be self-defeating with that request of evidence and reason. Okay, so what about now the conflict between science and religion? Now, Dawkins argues that the unfettered scientific inquiry inevitably ends up at atheism. That a true scientist, a genuine scientist, must be an atheist. So he believes that there's this inherent contradiction between religion and science. Religion and science, science and religion. But the problem here is this, is that Richard Dawkins has forgotten a great portion of Islamic history. What we know now about the medieval period of the Muslims is that not only were there theologians, but those theologians were logicians, mathematicians, philosophers, but also scientists. A tremendous amount of scientific advancements can be traced back to those Muslims. Many advancements. The foundations of modern science can be traced back to that era. Now, there are just a handful of individuals that have contributed to science. Just a handful. For example, we have Ibn al-Nafis, the greatest physiologist in the Middle Ages. Habib ibn Qurra was an astronomer, mathematician, and physician. Ibn Sina was considered the father of modern medicine. Was known for chemistry and was the first to oppose alchemy. Now, why is this information not mentioned? Where is this conflict between religion and science? If there was, then how is it that these individuals came about and to bring such advancements in the world? I'll explain to you why this happened. Because when these theologians were bounded by the inerrant word of God, the Quran, and when they were confronted with verses about the day and night, about the humble beginnings of humans, talking about the early stages of the embryo, for example, their scientific curiosity was a means of getting closer to God. In order to make sense of the book of God, they used science to know their God. This is why they had this explosion, if you like, of scientific achievement. Not only that, but Islam in itself was responsible for a lot of these achievements. Why? Because astronomy was linked to the 5-time prayer. Because they had to learn how to basically calculate the prayer time. So as a result, astronomy was a consequence. Geography was a consequence. Why? Because of the direction of the prayer. And there are many examples of this. There was this inherent essence and practice of Islam that was responsible of many of the advancements. And hence what we have is this explosion and of these individuals that are bringing these advancements. Now, also have a quote here by Bertrand Russell. He says, our use of the phrase the Dark Ages to cover the period from 699 to 1000 marked our undue concentration on Western Europe. From India to Spain, the brilliant civilization of Islam flourished. What was lost to Christendom at the time was not lost to civilization, but quite the contrary. Quote there by Bertrand Russell. What we also have here is a quote by Stephen J. Gould. And he makes a very interesting point here about science and religion. He says, to say for my colleagues for the upteenth millionth time, you can say he said this a few times, science simply cannot adjudicate the issue of God's possible superintendence of nature. We neither affirm it nor deny it. We simply can't comment on it as science. Stephen J. Gould, paleontologist, he is basically saying look, just because one believes in God, it has no impact on science. If someone believes the scientific method, for example, it would have no impact necessarily on the belief of God. He said there is no conflict here. Now, what is also important to mention here is that Richard Dawkins somehow believes that atheism has this monopoly on evolution, right? And that evolution necessarily contradicts theism or belief in God. And he uses evolution to lambast religious people and people that believe in God and theists. Now, what's interesting with Stephen J. Gould here, again, posed with this question of evolution and religion. What he does, he looks at the 19th century, up until the 19th century to contemporary times, and he looks at the individuals that believed in evolution, and he has two lists. He has humanists agnostic and atheist, and theists, or religious individuals. And what he finds is that going back to the 19th century, all those that were believed in the theory of evolution, it was 50-50. 50-50. The piles were even. He said, either my colleagues are enormously stupid, or else the science of Darwinism is fully compatible with the conventional religious beliefs, and equally compatible with atheism, thus proving that the two great realms of nature's factuality and source of human morality do not strongly overlap. So in that case, what have we covered so far? We've shown that this kind of view of religion being based on blind faith is false, that we can base religion on evidence. We've shown, therefore, that religion and science can be compatible, that there's no conflict there. So then how is it that Richard Dawkins has come with this idea that there is this conflict of science and religion, that science will inevitably end up at atheism? How does he come out with this? Well, the answer is in this little quote here. Whatever knowledge is attainable must be obtained by the scientific methods. And what science cannot discover, mankind cannot divert from us. This is the essence of Richard Dawkins' work. It permeates every aspect of it. What this is a claim on what knowledge is. It is a criteria of what we can know. What we can say is knowledge. And the essence of that is this, that knowledge is something that can be proved by science. Anything else is just a load of rubbish, including God. And if you believe in God, it's just a delusion, it's wishful thinking, and it's just madness. This is what permeates his work. This is the way in which he arrives at his conclusion that religion and science conflict. This is the issue at hand. And this is referred to as Scientism. So, my friends, the conflict is not science and religion. The conflict is Scientism and religion. Now, to understand what Scientism is, how does this method work? Well, it appeals to this method known as the verificationism principle. That all that it is true is something that is subject to the five senses. Right? Now, in order to understand that, we need to know the difference between a sentence and a proposition. A sentence is a linguistic entity comprised of words. A proposition is the informative content of that sentence. So, for example, if I said in English, this is a microphone, and if I said in Urdu, this is a microphone, which would be? Why does this always fail? Every time I ask this in the lecture, it goes horribly wrong. Let's just say, I heard what you said. Okay? So, now the words, the sentences would be different, right? But the proposition would be the same, the informative content would be the same. Now, during the 1930s, philosophers believed that this was a credible means of determining what was meaningful and what was meaningless. Meaningful, meaningless. Okay? So, for example, the proposition, God exists, was utterly meaningless. Why? Because God was not subject to the verification principle. We cannot empirically verify God, right? So saying God exists was equivalent to saying Gigi Gaga exists. Right? Gibberish. Absolute gibberish. Nonsense. And that had a dramatic effect on religion and theology. Everything. Like, for example, angels exist, or that God loves us, or that God will someday account us in the hereafter. There will be reward and punishment. Because we can't empirically verify any of those statements, they were deemed meaningless. Absolutely meaningless. However, a question like, is there a monkey on the moon, was perfectly fine. Meaningful. Why? Because someone could fly to the moon and empirically verify if there was a monkey there. That was a perfectly acceptable proposition or question. However, this principle encountered many, many problems. I want to mention two. The first was that philosophers found out later on that this principle of verificationism And at that time it was referred to logical positivism, and now we are referring to it as Scientism. This is new, more fashionable way of describing this principle. That it was highly restrictive, and it discarded a lot of our normal discourse. For example, metaphysical claims, such as the existence of the external world being real. You cannot use science to prove that the external world is real without already assuming that it's real. So that became a problem. And the idea that there are other minds, we cannot scientifically use the empirical process of proving that there are other minds. Also, ethical statements. For example, that showing love to a child is good, because of this principle, became nonsense. Because what is good? We cannot find good and evil in a test tube. We cannot conduct an experiment where what we have is an experiment in the lab and suddenly pops out with a chemical reaction, good and evil. Right? So those statements became lost, discarded. We had to just get rid of them. Also, aesthetics. So when someone said, oh, what a beautiful sunset. What a great scenery in Liverpool. What a beautiful architecture of the university. Those statements lost their meaning. But obviously we know when someone says something is beautiful. When someone says the sunset was beautiful, we know what that means. It is not meaningless. So that was one problem. The other problem is more fundamental. Think of it for a moment. The statement that says, the proposition that says, that for any statement to be meaningful must be subject to the verification principle. What's wrong with that? Think about it. The proposition that says that any proposition to be deemed meaningful must be subject to the 5 senses.
Self-refuting.
Absolutely. Self-refuting. That very same proposition is not subject to the verification principle. So it implodes. So what we have is a self-referentially incoherent standard of knowledge. It's an arbitrary standard of knowledge. It implodes. It's like saying, I don't speak a word of English. And you get that sometimes. You speak to someone and say, I don't speak in English. You think, well, how did you do that? And it's always when you want to ask directions. So the principle is an arbitrary standard that just completely implodes. And philosophers recognize this, and they abandon this highly restrictive and incoherent standard of knowledge, what we refer to now as scientism. However, those that were versed in the hard sciences during the 1940s still hold on, including Richard Dawkins, still hold on to this philosophical relic. And that is the reason in which they are concluding such conclusions like that there is a conflict between science and reason, that God is impossible. Why? Because we cannot test for God. These are the reasons because of this theory of knowledge. So Medawar says, the existence of a limit to science is however made clear by its inability to answer childlike elementary questions, having to do with the first, last things, questions such as, how did everything begin? What are we all here for? What is the point of living? Peter Medawar, author of Limits of Science. Right, so what I'd like to do now is to end with addressing the main arguments of Richard Dawkins' book in 157 and 158. Here we have a summary of his premises of his argument. The first is, well, the greatest challenges to the human intellect has been to explain how the complex, improbable appearance of design in the universe arises. Number 2, the natural temptation is to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself. Number 3, the temptation is a false one because the design hypothesis immediately raises a larger problem of who designed the designer. We'll be coming back. Number 4, the most ingenious and powerful explanation is Darwinian evolution by natural selection. We can say that an illusion of design in living creatures is just that, an illusion. Number 5, we don't have an equivalent explanation physics, some kind of multiverse theory could in principle do to physics the same explanatory work as Darwinism does for biology. Number 6, we should not give up the hope of a better explanation in physics, something as powerful as Darwinism is for biology. Therefore, God does not exist. Now, point to mention here is that even if this was a good argument and this logically followed, it would not, you could not logically conclude the conclusion that God does not exist. The most that this argument can show us is that we cannot infer design from complex organisms, or from complexity, if you like. That's the most. Why is that? Because the existence of God does not solely rely on the design hypothesis. Because there are other arguments. For example, that God makes the best explanation for the origin of the universe. That we need a transcendent cause to explain the origin of the universe. That God is the best explanation for the apprehension of objective morality. That we need God to ground morality in order for morality to exist. That God makes the best explanation for contingent existence. And so on and so on. And God is the best explanation for the authorship of the Quran. And so on and so on. There are many other arguments. One could not conclude, even if this was a good argument, that God does not exist. So the conclusion is a false one, for a start. But having said that, it's not a very good argument. And the reason being is because if we look at premise number 3 and number 5, they're not very good points. Then we'll address why that is. Now, what does Dawkins say in number 3? He says, the temptation to infer design is a false one, because the design hypothesis immediately raises the large problem, who then designed the designer? Now, what the objection here is saying is that we do not have an explanatory advancement, because when we posit a designer for the universe, for its complexity, then all we do is we change the complexity with something that is more complex. So he says we're back to square one again, and there's no advancement whatsoever. But here, Dawkins has two mistakes. The first is that in order to warrant an explanation, one doesn't have to have the explanation of the explanation. Right? We do not have to have the explanation of the explanation in order to explain something. I'll give you an example. Imagine you're walking in the woods in Liverpool somewhere. Do you have any woods in Liverpool? Okay, we'll just go with me on this one. And you encounter some hidden cave for the first time. You and your friend decide to be quite adventurous, and you go inside the cave, and then on the walls of the cave, inner walls, you find some ancient drawings of men with spears, and horses and cattle, and a Ferrari, right? And not a Ferrari. I'm just trying to get your attention. See if you're listening. And you turn to your friend and say, look, there must have been civilization here many, many years ago. Look at that. And your friend says, no. We don't know what they look like. We don't know where they are. Who are these people? No, of course not. That's not a product of design. It's just, we can't explain it whatsoever. You would look at your friend and say he was quite loony. Of course, that is an indication that someone was there. There is a design essence. There is an essence of design there. There's intelligent design behind that painting in those on the wall, right? So, in order to have an explanation, we do not need to have an explanation for that explanation. We can warrant an explanation without having an explanation for the explanation. But let's just assume that Dawkins is right, that we do need an explanation for an explanation. That would mean that nothing would be explained. Science would become obsolete. Nothing, because we'd have to go ad infinitum. The explanation of this, and his explanation of that, and we'll go on forever, and we would never have an explanation for anything whatsoever. So ironically, science would actually become obsolete. The more fundamental mistake is that Richard Dawkins assumes that necessarily the design that is an explanation is more complex than the universe itself. That the design itself is more complex, or the designer of the universe, the explanation for the universe is more complex. And here he makes this mistake, because he confuses the being and the knowledge of the being. Yes, the knowledge of the being that is responsible, the designer, let's say, is complex. But the being itself who is immaterial and timeless, is a very simple being to grasp. It has no moving parts compared to a universe that has this vastness about it. It's vastly complex with its inexplicable quantities and constants. Compared to that, that a being outside time and space to be a designer is very, very simple. So what Richard Dawkins has done here, he's confused the knowledge of a being and the being itself. So one can safely warrant the explanation that we don't have a problem with this premise number 3, that one can say the explanation of the complexity is a designer safely without any objections. Now, I don't want to end there by saving premise by objecting to premise number 3 of his argument. I also want to put forward a positive argument for the design argument. Now, once upon a time, scientists believed that any kind of combination of initial conditions of the universe will end up allowing the appearance of intelligent beings like us. That any condition would be able to sustain intelligent life. But in the last 30 or 40 years, scientists have been stunned to discover that the initial conditions were carefully crafted to sustain our existence. And our existence rests on a knife edge. Now, firstly, when I talk about intelligent design, what do I mean by that? Well, firstly, the way in which we carve up experience is to distinguish between randomness, chance, accident, natural forces, material processes on one hand, and design process, intelligence, intention on the other. This is how we make sense of the world, by making those distinctions. Now, to make those distinctions, we have to eliminate chance or necessity. And the way in which we can make that distinction is by recognizing something called specified complexity. William Dempsey refers to this as high improbability and an independently given pattern. High improbability and an independently given pattern. Now, when an intelligent being acts, it leaves a trace of specified complexity. And by recognizing this feature of specified complexity, we can distinguish intelligently designed objects from objects that are a result of unintelligent causes or natural causes. Now, when we look at the initial conditions of the universe, it cries out specified complexity. Now, there are many, many reasons, many examples of the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. I just want to give you one. The prominent cosmologist Alan Guth comments, a change by just one part in 10 to the power of 55, that's 1 followed by 55 zeros, just one part, to the power of, 1 part in 10 to the power of 55 of the rate of the expansion of the universe would have led to the universe to expand too little or too much, with a consequence of rapid collapse. That it would be impossible to sustain intelligent life. Just one chance of 10 to the power of 55. Now, the eminent mathematician, Roger Penrose, has calculated that the odds of all the initial conditions of the universe falling in a life-permitting, narrow, life-permitting range, by itself, by accident, are 1 chance out of 10 to the power of 123. Astronomical number. Now, those numbers might not mean much to you. They're quite abstract. But let me give you an illustration that will give you kind of understanding of what we're dealing with here. Okay, say for example, I took North America and filled it with coins all the way up to the moon. That's 239,000 miles upwards. Coins. And I took a billion other same-sized continents and did exactly the same. Filled the coins 239 miles up, and so on. And I took someone from the ISOP team, said to them, right, got a task for you. Took 5 red coins and mixed them within the billion coins. And we said to this person that you have to find 5 red coins in 5 goes, blindfolded, or we have to say bye to you and shoot. And we think he's not going to do it, obviously. We didn't like him anyway, right? I'm just joking, by the way. And he has 1 go, he gets a red coin. The second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. Lo and behold, 5 goes, he gets 5 coins, red coins. Now, the chances of that happening by chance alone, randomly, are 1 part out of 10 to the power of 37. That is infinitely smaller than the constants that we're talking about. And Roger Penrose, he said 1 chance out of 10 to the power of 123. It's astronomically smaller than what we're talking about. The odds are so great. If, for example, this person from the ISOC did that, wouldn't we think that there was a fix-up? Wouldn't we think that he was cheating? We would accuse him of cheating. We would think that there was a conspiracy. Someone helped him in the ISOC, right? But the greatest conspiracy is the initial conditions of the universe. That is the greatest conspiracy. If we use the same canons of reason that we use in our day-to-day life, and we apply it to the initial conditions of the universe, we can only conclude that it was a product of intelligent design. Now, detractors of design will argue that, maybe some of you heard about this multiverse theory. Hands up if you've heard about the multiverse. Right. And as you can see in point number 5, Richard Dawkins is hoping that this design element will be overdone by this multiverse. So what this is an attempt to basically increase the probabilistic resources. What Dawkins wants is what Darwinism did to complex organisms and to explain away the design there, he wants the multiverse to explain away the inextricable fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. But this has many, many problems. Firstly, it is not science to talk of a multiverse. This is pseudoscience. This is purely metaphysics. Let's just get that straight, right? Second point, if we use the principle of Occam's razor, that we should not posit causes beyond necessity, then if one cause does the business, then why invent this mother universe with these infinite number of universes? Why would we do that? Unless we want to avoid theism, which then is begging the question. The other point, the third point, is this, is that it has no independent evidence whatsoever. No independent. We have no evidence. We can't even get to the end of our universe, and we want to start talking about other universes. We have no evidence whatsoever that there are other universes out there. No independent evidence whatsoever. So this is as good as talking about Hades controlling the underworld. If you have no evidence for it, that's all that we could produce this kind of talk. And the last thing is this, that many cosmologists that talk about the multiverse, they argue that it too has to be designed. How on earth does it generate these infinite number of universes without itself being designed? Many cosmologists talk of inflation, which is essential to the multiverse, and they say that inflation rate, that constant of inflation, has to be fine-tuned itself. So what design is an annoying bump in the carpet. You suppress it somewhere here, it comes out somewhere else. So by Dawkins, for example, hoping for the multiverse, all that would achieve is take the problem of design up one level. It cannot be escaped. So what we can conclude as follows. Specified complexity is a marker of intelligent design, and it is, or induces a method of design detection. Specified complexity is present in fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. Therefore, the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe posits design. Let me repeat that one more time, for those who are making notes. Specified complexity is a marker of intelligent design or induces a method of design detection. The specified complexity is present in fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. Therefore, the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe posit design. I will conclude there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for the talk, it was very enjoyable. I just have one question about something that was early on in your talk. I just wondered why it is that, why it is you think that physicalism necessitates determinism? Because I'm sure theories have been put forward to say that physicalism could incorporate elements of randomness or things like that. Things like chaos theory maybe undermine that position. Just wondering What do you say to that?
I don't particularly find them very persuasive, because in order, and many atheists will sort of concede that if we are just physical beings, then there is no actual self in the sense of a immaterial self, and that if we're just if we reduce he was determined. So if we just reduce the kind of reductive aspect of human beings, then that where do we locate intentionality? There's an interesting study done, and I can't remember the professor's name. The name escapes me. But what he did was to attach electrodes to patients, and what you can actually do is stimulate. He started stimulating the person's arm, right? And with all the patients that he did that with, every time he asked them, he said to them, "Okay, did you do that?" And then every patient would say, "No, I didn't do that. That was you." And what was also interesting was that even recollection, he could stimulate recollection in the brain, memories. And every time he asked, "Is that you doing that? Was that me?" He said, the patient would reply, "No, that's not me, that's you're doing that." Now what's interesting is this, is that is connected to the aspect of the brain to cause that to happen. But the person didn't feel like they were doing it. So that means there is something in between the interaction of the material and ourselves. There is something there that's missing that cannot be grasped by physicalism, by the physical existence. There must be something else there. And that is the point, that if we are just physical beings, then all our actions must be determined. How is it that we can decide what to do? I had a debate with Peter Atkins, and he said, I said, you must be just a physical being. What is there beyond the physicality? He said, well, no, we're complex. And I said, okay. I said, when you're sad, who's sad? Is it your brain or is it you? And then he just looked at me and thought, oh, well, it's my brain. Well, really? Is it your brain that's sad? Is it your... When someone says, are you really upset? I go, no, I'm not upset, my brain's upset. Right? So there is this genuine problem to do with it's the substance dualism. And who else did I debate with? Raymond Tallis, for example, who's a leading expert in this field, and he recognised that there is a genuine problem in science between the connection with the physical and the immaterial, and the problem of potentiality. So I see what you're saying about those theories, but how would that resolve that issue? You see, how would that resolve that issue in that sense? If we have chaos theory, but then how would you enable one to be intentionally moving objects if it's chaos? It'd be random. But then you would have... Are you allowed to respond?
Yes.
Good. It'll be great. I think that's a fine explanation of how you draw that conclusion. But it seems to depend on the assertion that there is something immaterial.
No.
Where's the positive argument?
No. I don't have to prove that the immaterial exists in order to show that what follows is determinism. If the immaterial doesn't exist, then at my point, according to your worldview, then that's perfectly fine for you. I have other arguments to suggest immaterial self. But the problem is, all I have to do is say, sorry, what was your name?
Matt.
Matt. I say, Matt, is this what you believe? And you say, yes, Adam, that's what I think. Okay, great. And do you believe this also? Yes. I just connect the dots and say, okay, well then that means determinism. And none of those dots involve believing in an immaterial self. The determinism is simply a consequence of what you believe, not what I believe. I presume you're an atheist.
I would say
regardless, yeah, anyone, let's say an atheist believes. Yeah, let's just say, it's not personal. Just an atheist. I just say to the person, this is a result of what you believe. In order for me to support my position that what follows from atheism is naturalism and then physicalism and determinism and irrationality, that atheism is irrational, I don't have to prove the immaterial self. It's independent of that. But there are three arguments why one could argue immaterial self. For example, the consequence of about something. How does matter have a thought about something? You need to have a self-awaring aspect of human beings to have about something, this consciousness, right? Also to do with the fact of, hold on, am I going too long here? Because this could be another lecture. Let's ask another question. I think I answered your question. You know, maybe you don't agree with it, but yeah.
I'm going to comment on that. But yeah, I was just going to say, just because we feel things or we can think about things doesn't necessarily need an immaterial self. It's perfectly possible to believe in materialism and to believe in determinism even, but still to believe that things like concepts and ideas exist. It's still possible to believe in a self.
Okay, but you're saying it's possible, but my problem is, how is it possible? How is it possible? You're saying it's possible, how is it possible though? Because I'm saying, okay, if mental events are just physical, that you don't have an immaterial self that holds those events, then how is it possible that you're not determined? Because if for example, when a tree grows another branch, it didn't have a choice, because it's physical, right? But really, qualitatively, we're no different from a tree, in the sense that we're just physical beings also, right? Now, from a theistic perspective, as a Muslim, I don't believe we're just physical things. I think what defines us is the immaterial, the soul. And in this capacity, I can make choices, I can have consciousness, and think, right? And I am free. But put that aside. That's not interesting right now. What's interesting is, if God doesn't exist, and consciousness isn't based on the immaterial self, then how can you have it?
Well, you can have consciousness as a manifestation of what's physical, in the sense that things like if you run a computer.
Sorry, I was about to say that you're saying that you can see the consciousness as a result of the manifestation, but you're begging the question.
In what sense?
Because you're saying that you already believe that the manifestation is a result of a free-willed being that is material. But
no, I'm not talking about free will. I'm talking about there being a self.
Well,
I'm
free
saying
will
you still believe in self while being material.
Okay, but how would you know that from the... Say, for example, we had a robot, right? We had a robot, and it moved. But the robot doesn't actually think for itself. It only has program, right? Because what we are just robots. We're just computers made from flesh, ultimately, right? But the robot cannot think outside of its programming. But that's what I'm saying about human beings. If we're just a physical makeup, our DNA, all our thoughts, our actions are a product of our DNA.
Well, they're a product of our DNA and of our environment that we're taking in. If you create...
That's fine.
Yeah.
But even the environment, if we put that into the equation, that doesn't help you. How do you escape our determinism?
Oh, I'm not talking about escaping determinism, I'm talking about there being self, without being a dualist, without believing in
where would the self be? Your toe?
No, your self will be there as a manifestation of what's physical. In the sense that...
Let me ask you a question, sorry, let me interrupt you here. Okay. Every 7 years or so, your physical makeup changes. Right, there's lots of medical students here, right? So you can back me up, right? Is it the case that the DNA, the physical structure that you had when you were born is not the same as that you are when you're in your 30s? Because it's rejuvenating, right?
I mean, the deposits deep in your bones might not necessarily change, but on the whole... Okay,
well, I wouldn't want to conclude that myself is my bones, but anyway, but let's just say on the whole it changes.
But if I take a piece of art...
If I just finish, sorry. Yeah. So if you do not have a constant of your existence, then how can you have the identity or self-identity? How can you have self-identity? If the day that you're born has a different physical makeup to, let's say, when you're my age, very young, in the 30s, yeah, then what is that the same person? Is that the same person?
Well, if you took a piece of art,
No, you just answer the question. Is it the same
I
person?
am answering the question.
Just
Allow me to
Yeah,
answer
sorry.
this,
I didn't actually finish it. It was like a question I was going to lead on to an argument, but you're more welcome to.
Well, if you took a piece of art and you said this is clearly a drawing of a horse and it's in watercolour, if one by one you replaced every atom with a different atom, but that was of the same element, you would still end up with the same thing.
No, that would not be the same thing. You have a depiction of what was there before, but it would not be the same thing. Look, say for example, I change every single physical part of my body with someone else's physical body. Am I going to be the same person? No. Every single part, and this is my argument. This is the illustration. Look, imagine you change every single year. Imagine I'm comprised of 30 parts. Just go with that, yeah? God knows how many parts I have. So 30 parts, right? And every year, for 30 years, you change a part of me. Is that still Adam? And then what I do with the parts that I've taken off, I construct another being. Who's Adam?
Well, provided you have the same neural...
no, every part. No, every part.
Yeah, then you would be the same person. You would be identical copies of the same person.
No, why would that? No, I don't think that logically follows.
Well, if you believe that there's an immaterial soul, then you wouldn't believe that.
Okay.
If you believe that there isn't, then you would believe that you're the same person.
I know that you're saying that you would believe it, but I'm trying to understand why you would believe it.
Because I believe that all we are is the product of our physiological makeup.
In that case, then you have to concede that it would be someone else. If what defines you is the physicality, if you lose the physicality, then how can you be the same person?
Well,
it's like you're contradicting yourself to a certain degree.
Yeah, but it's in the makeup of the physicality. In the same, well, you used analogies, and I might use one, but I'll have to stop because I probably think I'm going too long.
No, I think I'm enjoying it now.
Okay. Well, if you had a computer program, if you had a movie, for example, and there's a 10-second clip of a dog catching a ball. Now, that movie, in and of itself, doesn't exist. It's not a physical thing. You can't touch this film that you're watching. It exists.
Yes, you can. Take that was a TV screen.
You're touching the screen. You're not touching the film.
But I'm touching the pixels of that actual scene.
But I'm not talking about the pixels, I'm talking about the film.
But it's not real, though. It's not the same. No, wait one second. Now you're getting carried away with your analogy. If I have a TV screen of the park, right, and I say to you, let's go to the park, we wouldn't go to the TV screen, we would go to the actual park. They're not the same. Your analogy only works if they are actually the same.
No,
but they're not.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, you have a film, and that film is as a result of the particular makeup of the silicon in the computer. Okay? So when you're watching this film exists as a manifestation of this material makeup in the computer. Because the silicon chips in the computer are aligned in this particular way, it gives rise to this film which we're experiencing, or a program that we could interact with. Now, if you change physically every single component of the computer for one that was in an identical position, you would end up with the same film.
No, it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same.
Well, no,
you'd have a replica of what was there, but it wouldn't be the same. That's like saying that a filming of the woods is the same as the woods. No, it's not the same.
No, it's like saying one filming of the wood is the same.
Even if I had a copy of a, let's say if I had a DVD of this lecture here, right, $9.99. Just joking. Even if I had a copy of that and I copied it, it wouldn't be the same one. And I destroyed it and I said, here's the original. It wouldn't be the same because you're changing the physicality of the medium.
The physical DVD would be different, but the film you were watching would be the same. I watch the same type of movie as you watch, even though we use different physical DVDs. We're watching the same film.
Okay, right. So let's talk about the same. For example, if we had, let's say that we cloned me. We cloned me, right? And we replaced each. I'm Adam, and there's another clone of me. The clone is just now, right? And I marked A and B, and I replaced the parts. Even though the nails are the same, it's not the same person. Is the person the same? We may look the same, but it's not the same person that was Adam as A. A is now changed. A is now at B. B is at A. Because if you say that, then that would mean that you'd actually undermine personal identity. Because if our physicality is based upon the physical solely, if we reduce our identity as materialism or physicalism, then how is it that we maintain the personal identity from the day that we want to do?
Because it's a construct. Because personal identity is
construct. Exactly, and it's not real. That's my point.
It's real in the same sense that Sherlock Holmes is real. He's a construct, and we can talk about him. And we can talk
But
about
does Sherlock Holmes exist?
Sorry?
Does Sherlock Holmes exist?
He exists in my idea.
Does the actual person exist? Come on.
Depends what question you're asking. The person doesn't exist. Yeah, and the idea does.
Now we have Descartes. I'm really here.
Oh, can we discuss this afterwards? I feel
course,
like we should
of
stop
course,
because
yeah.
the room seems distant.
I'm here. I'm actually staying over.
I just want to ask one question. I just want a yes or no answer, so we can move it on. If we were able to produce, hypothetically speaking, and we probably never will be able to do this, but if we were able to produce a computer which was exactly replicated the neuronal network of the human mind, do you think if we turned it on and then let it go, that it would have a perception of free will and consciousness?
That if we replicate as a human, no.
Okay, that's all the answer I wanted.
Great.
Thank you.
Is that a good answer or a bad answer?
No comment.
No. No, thanks. Good. No, very good question.
Yeah, thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
Earlier on, you said Dawkins describes religious beliefs blindly, completely. What then would you describe faith as?
Faith, for me, faith is, we have something called warranted faith or reasonable faith. I have faith in God's trust. I trust in God. I have faith in His ability, His power, that I will be looked after. Like in Islamic traditions, we have something called tawakkul, which is a reliance on God. That is my faith, because I have only a limited amount of knowledge, limited amount of ability to determine how my life will turn out and how it will be for the best. Right? In that sense, I have faith. But I have faith in something that I know that exists. That faith is grounded in something that I know. It's like, for example, if there was a chair here, there isn't one. But I know that the chair is there, and I have faith it's going to hold my weight, right? I don't just go, I think there's a chair there, and I sit back and I'll probably hurt myself, right? I have faith that the chair is going to hold my weight, but I don't do that not knowing that the chair is there. Say, for example, you're going to have an operation, and you want to be sure that this is the best choice, that it's the right hospital, it's the right doctor. So what do? You research the doctor, find his qualifications, his history, so you make a decision based on that evidence. But could it be the case that he could make a mistake? Of course. But what you do on that evidence is you have faith that the evidence supports that you have a safe surgery. So it's warranted faith, right, in that sense. What tends to happen is the religions, they've taken the faith and they've put it first. It's the cart before the horse. They have faith in something that I don't know exists. And it's like, yes, it's going to exist. It does exist. I love this thing, but they don't even know if it exists. Whereas what we say is, as Muslims, we say, okay, does God exist? These are the arguments. Great. Now I have faith. I trust in Him, that He will provide, He will look after me, etc., etc. And that's what faith is.
Okay, thank you.
Are the questions outside? Can we sit about any questions?
Yesterday I gave a talk, and I only got one question, and sadly, it was my presentation was like half an hour, 15 minutes of it was on this topic of the Big Bang, and then someone said to me, what do I say to someone when they mention the Big Bang? And I just thought, my God, where have you been? But yeah, this is a very good Q&A. Yes, until now.
I'm going to try and keep this a bit more simple and a bit quicker. So I've got a few questions. So firstly, like playing on René Descartes, I'm going to say, if you took everything off the table and you had to put something on there that you knew existed for sure, what could you put on there?
When you say you knew something existed,
Like, it was certain, there was no uncertainty at all because there was evidence.
well,
there.
philosophers have grappled with this term certainty for many, many centuries. There are only a handful of things, that's probably less than a handful of things that you can say that are certain for sure. And the only thing that Descartes came out with is, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
so
we know
something.
it exists.
So you,
So
know that it exists.
I'm going to say, does this spoon exist?
Yeah.
How do you know that it exists and your brain's not just telling you it exists?
Yes. Now, obviously, if you're crossing the road and I say to you, watch that card, would you say to me, well, how do you know the card's you would make a reasonable decision.
Like, for example, you don't know if you're dreaming, you don't know if your brain's telling you something exists or that it
Yes.
actually exists.
Yes.
So I'm going to say, in the end, does it matter?
When you said, so give me the example again about the spoon.
I'm saying, if you take everything off the table and you put on something that certainly you know exists, you can only put on yourself because you think about existing, therefore you must exist to be thinking about
Yeah.
it.
So
if
you know
I
you
ask
asked me
you
about the
to-
spoon.
If I ask you, does this spoon exist?
Which spoon?
This spoon.
Which spoon?
So you cannot
Sorry,
answer.
which spoon?
Yeah. So you know.
Hold on, wait, which spoon?
Okay.
You have to concede within even the conundrum that you're trying to create, even in the same conundrum, you have to concede the very thing that you're trying to say doubt that it exists.
But for your,
We both agree
Yeah.
that that exists.
But this is you talking to yourself. It's not me talking to you.
Wait.
For your mind to try and think about something that exists is impossible because it doesn't even matter. Like why does it matter? Because you're not going to be able to prove it because you can't prove it.
I don't. Okay, right. You've got the things upside down here. I don't have to prove that that thing exists there. I don't have to prove beyond my
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you why does it matter?
Why? What matters, right?
Why does it matter to prove what exists? Because it's impossible. Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to the doctor and he says you have cancer, do you say to him, doesn't matter, you know, we can't prove anything?
Well, no,
You'll probably say to him, doctor, you know, do you have any evidence for this? It's going to affect my life.
I'm talking about in the sense of having created things or God or religion. If the effect has the effect.
Okay, 1 second. Right, so you're saying, okay, now I'm kind of getting what you're saying, right? You're saying, if you can't prove anything, then why can't you have just blind faith in God because nothing can be proved? Is that what you're trying to say?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Because it has the effect it's going to have, and you aren't going to be able to prove it because the only thing you can prove is yourself. So why attempt it or?
But we can prove something. Right, for example, logical laws. The law of non-contradiction is true, even if it didn't exist. That P and not P is a contradiction. You can't have them in the same proposition. That is true even if it didn't exist.
That's right.
Right? Your existence is true because even to be deceived that you're existing, you need to exist to know that. Right? Descartes, old school Descartes stuff. Right? Now the question is this, that you have to believe in, so what you, this is fideism. What you're espousing here is fideism. The idea that if nothing can be proved, then why can't we basically just believe in anything?
Yeah.
But there's a problem there. Because what you're talking about is something fundamental. These are axioms of reason. You're doubting the very axioms of reason. Jesus died for my sins, for example, or Muhammad was a prophet, right? Or Buddha was enlightened. These are worldviews. They're not on the same par as basic concepts, basic propositions, right? So we can, because in order to believe in anything, we all have to agree that even, for example, you presenting this conundrum, you have to believe that I'm here listening to you because it doesn't make sense for you to even talk to me about the conundrum. That's what I said about the spoon. I said, which spoon? Because even to say to me, how do you know this exists, you have to agree that it's there to say, how do you know it exists, right? On that level, the onus is on the skeptic to say that I should doubt that I'm experiencing that this is a lecture hall and everyone's enjoying this lecture, right? Right? Yeah. Right? So it's down to the skeptic to say to me, he shoulders the burden of proof. Why? Okay. Or the fact that that my mind is in a chemical vat, being stimulated by chemical electrodes, making me think that I'm in a lecture hall giving this lecture, etc., etc. These are called epistemological dilemmas that we cannot disprove. But the question is wrong. The point is, can you prove that I am in a situation like that? Yeah, that's what I would say. I would say that the onus is on the skeptic. The onus is on the skeptic to provide me reasons to believe that this bottle is not here. When we both have to agree with it. You can always talk to me after. If I'm here, right? He's going to come up to you and go, how did I'm here?
Alright, any more questions? We'll give someone else a chance. Make it quick, you like
So at the end, in your argument, where you said, well, your final argument basically, you rejected the idea of a multiverse because there was no evidence for it.
No independent evidence.
Sorry?
No independent evidence.
Right, but earlier you rejected the idea of scientism. I don't understand how you can... Why do you reject a multiverse as something which has no evidence? But earlier say, evidence isn't everything.
No, I never said that. No. So it would be a crime. It would be a crime if we left this lecture thinking that I thought evidence is not everything. Evidence is very important. We need to warrant our beliefs. Scientism is rejected because it's a false standard of knowledge. Right?
But you're applying that standard of knowledge to the multiverse theory.
No, not.
You're saying there is nothing that... You're saying
No.
there is no evidence for multiverse. I'm not really sure.
No, I'm saying, you're assuming that I am saying that the evidence for the multiverse can be only substantiated by a strict definition of knowledge, which is scientism. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that physical evidence is not evidence. I'm not saying that that we can't use the physical world as evidence or science as evidence. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we can't say that science is the only form of evidence. Right? So, when you're... Sorry, go on.
So, maybe there could be other evidence for multiverses.
Yes, but we don't have any.
Okay, but not having evidence for something isn't a reason to object.
Okay. That's a very good point. It's a very good point he's making now. See, because absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's a very good point to make. But, I'm not saying a multiverse doesn't exist in that sense. I'm saying we don't have reason to believe in a multiverse. And I also use the principle of Occam's razor. When one explanation does a job, why postulate an infinite number of multiverses? Like, for example, if I went out the room and I came back and the bottle was tipped over, right? I would say someone did it, right? To be reasonable. I wouldn't say there was 100 football hooligans, they came down the stairs and they pushed this by and they went out the other door. You think I was mad? Because why? Because if one person does the job, that's it. Until I work out that there was a football match, they'd have to go through here to cut, a shortcut of some sort, right? But until I have that information, why would I conclude that there's a multiverse that exists? Do you understand that? More importantly, there is no evidence beyond our universe. So again, why do we have to... I genuinely believe that the only reason we postulate a multiverse is to avoid the conclusion of theism.
Okay, but I work in areas of research, M theory, string theory, etc., which, they...
They make sense to a certain degree.
Yeah, sure. And one of the things that they could postulate would be like ideas about before the Big Bang and ideas of how our universe came into being. You can't just reject them off hand. These are real theories that real people are working on.
Oh yeah, but just because something's a theory doesn't mean it's right.
No, but it's not to say that it can't be right.
No.
It's just
I'm not saying. Look, at the moment, which is not up for debate, is that our universe has an origin. Our universe has an origin. That's not up for debate, right? So the buck stops there. All the rest is hypothetical, is metaphysics, Now, it may come to a stage that it's true, right? I'm leaving that door open. But I'm saying at this point moment in time, we have no reason to believe that. These are just theories. And that's why, M theory was criticised by some prominent cosmologists.
But to me, theology is metaphysics as well. So by the same token, you can't accept theology.
No. I'm not saying theology is obsolete because it's metaphysics. I'm saying they do not have the demeanour that this is scientific. That God is less scientific in that sense. The God hypothesis is metaphysical, and so is the multiverse, because we do not have any evidence of a multiverse. Look, even if the multiverse existed, I made the last point was what? It itself would need to be designed.
No, that's...
No, yes, of course. Because how does it... Oh, yes. Read up on inflationary theories about the multiverse, that the inflation has to be set, that even that has to be fine-tuned. How is
but
it...
given an infinite number of multiverse
No.
is, then, there are infinite numbers of possible...
No, you're missing the point. I'm not talking about a universe within the mother universes. I'm talking about the mother universe that generates the universes. Right? Each and every one of those universes will be explained by the mother universe. But what about the design of the mother universe that's generating the universes? That has to be explained. So that's what I said, you're pushing the problem up somewhere else.
Well, I could push it as far as I wanted, because I could say there are an infinite number of mother multiverses, etc., etc. And, this would just be a really terrible...
Okay, well let me give you another conundrum then. If you believe that there is an infinite series or infinite number of mother universes, then for this universe to be created, you would have to traverse an infinite number of mother universes. And for the infinite number of mother universes, that means it's traversing the infinite, which is impossible.
No, I'm just saying that we live in one of these universes, and that's not the problem. One of these universes are such that we live in it, and that's...
Firstly, it's not a problem because you assume that it exists. But I'm saying, even if you did say it existed, even if you did believe that there was a mechanism to bring about this infinite number of universes, that it's how do you know that that's going to be the right conditions? Look, if you believe that, how many of us have heard this parody of God being like believing in fairies, in unicorns? You've heard that, right? Right? You've heard that, right? But the actual joke is on the person who's coming out with that. I'll tell you why. Because if the atheist believes in the multiverse theory, that means that there is a non-zero probability of every actual... Are you listening, sir? This one's for you.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, listen to this one. This point, I want you to understand. That there is a non-zero probability of every logical possibility existing. Every logical possibility existing, because there is an infinite number of universes, right? Now, that would mean that anything that is logically possible would have to exist, right? Now, since unicorns are logically possible, then that would mean that an atheist would have to believe in unicorns.
In some universe, yes. Not necessarily our universe.
So you believe in unicorns?
Living outside our universe.
Wow, that kind of turns the tables around. Now the theist doesn't believe in pink elephants and unicorns, but the atheist now believes in unicorns.
May I just say?
I'm just joking.
It's our universe, but if there was a possible infinite number...
But do you not think that this is fairy tale? This idea?
Yes, I'm sure it is.
Okay, but you have no empathy. But you have no empathy. Look, what is the charge? Look, what is Dawkins' charge against theists? What is his charge? Because we believe in something without any evidence, right? But you believe in a multiverse where there's no evidence, and the evidence goes against it.
What I'm saying is that there is no inconsistency with if you believe in things outside the universe, such as metaphysics. There is no reason for you not to believe in an infinite multiverse as well. Like, those two things aren't mutually exclusive.
So, right, in this universe, since there's nothing to say that's inconsistent, can you believe in unicorns?
Sorry?
Since it's possible to believe in unicorns, can you believe in unicorns?
I can believe in
Yes, but would you say that I believe in unicorns?
Would I say
in this universe? Because there's no evidence to say that unicorns don't exist.
Yeah, okay, I could say...
You believe in unicorns?
Well, what reason will I have not to believe in God? Why
Right,
do you
okay, this is
believe?
going in a different tangent now. You know, I've really lost you
I'm
now.
sorry, but there's no, you can't insult me if you believe in unicorns and when you don't believe in unicorns.
Would that be rational? Would that be rational?
As rational as atheists insulting religious.
Oh, sorry, just time to interrupt.
Not rational.
We've got a few more questions.
Sure.
Assalamualaikum. I just have one question for you. My sensors tells me that this step is solid, but science tells me that it's mostly nothing. You discuss with us the limitations of using empirical means to prove or disprove everything we see, i.e. God.
Could you repeat the question?
Probably the end. You mean the question? Okay. Could you discuss with us
You forgot the question.
the whole question? Okay. My sensors tells me that the stairs that I am stepping on is solid. But
I remember that one.
science is telling me
Do
that
that again.
it is mostly nothing.
We could get him doing that all night.
Alright, the question is, could you discuss with us the limitations of using empirical means to prove or disprove everything we see or everything we know, i.e. God?
Do you want to answer that question?
For a start, science says that, okay, it may say that there is lots of space there, but what you're doing when you're banging your foot on the table is not just like physical things banging together, but this sort of repulsion between your foot and the depths, which causes you not to go through it. You know? It's not like it's not a physical entity that's banging, banging, banging. It's like forces repulsing, repelling. So, I mean, that doesn't really answer the question back
We were just going to ask the next question.
Yeah. Sorry. I was going to answer it, but he messed it up. You know, I was so ready.
Assalamualaikum. When you had the slide up of Dawkins' several arguments against God, the very last sentence on it was quite striking. When you quote from the book, it says that this shows that God almost certainly doesn't exist. Does that show? Can't we now say that the biggest atheist in Britain, even he isn't an atheist because he's not 100% sure that God doesn't exist?
Yes, you can say that. Yeah. You can say that.
Yeah,
Pure technicality. That's what we mean when we say that God probably doesn't exist.
Okay, cool. So,
And that's why
so
somebody,
Muslims exist.
on a pure technicality,
Can I just interrupt?
100% atheist.
The question was tied to the speaker, so
Yeah. It's all right.
I thought it had more force if I actually existed.
Yeah. If you remember the campaign on the buses, which said, God probably doesn't exist, so make the most of your life. See, the term probably doesn't exist. I mean, I would consider edging effects, right? Because the reason for that is that Richard Dawkins, he's a person who says that he's an atheist, meaning that he believes that he's making a knowledge claim that God does not exist. He's not saying that there's not enough evidence. He's not saying that I just withhold belief in God, but he actually said there is no evidence in God's existence. And from reading the literature, I haven't really seen any argument that really is persuasive enough for him to even hold that position of atheism. I haven't seen that. Now, some people say, well, proving a negative, you can't prove a negative. Well, that's wrong in itself. That's negative in itself. You can. For example, we know that squared circles do not exist, right? That's it. So, in order to show that that God does not exist, you could demonstrate that by showing that God, by definition, is inconsistent, incoherent. The very nature of his existence leads to contradiction, so one can support that. I think that the only genuine position to not believe in God is to be an agnostic. I think that's the only genuine position. Atheism, I think it shoulders a tremendous amount of proof that it just can't provide answers to. I do think it's a very, very difficult position to maintain. Because look, even if there was a lack of it, Bertrand Russell said, he was asked once what he would say to God on Judgment Day. If God said, "But Russell, why don't you believe in me?" And he said, "I'll just say, not enough evidence, God, not enough evidence." Right? Now, the problem with that is that even if there isn't any evidence whatsoever, like the gentleman that was saying it, I think what he was sort of alluding to is that even if there's no evidence of something, you cannot say it does not exist. Right? I would agree with that point that you're making, right? You cannot say that it does not exist. In the same sense, then how can Richard Dawkins, or any atheist really, say that God doesn't exist even if there's a lack of evidence? One could say that it's not a rational position because I don't have any evidence to support it, but I cannot conclude that God does not exist. Like many cosmologists believe that the sort of infancy stage of the universe went through sort of inflationary period, right? Now, that inflationary period gives us an explanation for certain aspects of the universe, but we don't have any evidence for it. But we can't then deny that it didn't happen. Do you see it? Do you see that point? Right? Now, the next question is then, what is the most rational position to have, even if you don't have any evidence for God's existence? What is the most rational position? Are you warranted? And I think that even if you don't have any evidence, you could still be warranted in believing God's existence.
Rationally, for me, as a Muslim, rationally, if I was to think about it, if there is a God, if, for example, I die, okay, and there isn't a God, okay, then it's all good, me and the atheist in the same position. But if there is a God, then
Pascal's
no problem. And rationally, it could be a 50-50 chance, okay?
Yeah.
Or if it does end up in the 150%.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying, although I don't think it's a very good argument.
Yeah.
Okay? I'll tell you why. Because just because something's in your benefit, it doesn't mean it's true. Right? What I think Pascal's wager is best placed is for us to consider the question of God's existence. Because sometimes you may have encountered people that are apathetic to the question of God's existence. They may say, okay, even if God did exist, so I don't care. What's it got to do with me? Right? This is why I think Pascal's wager is useful. Why? Because of the fact that you could lose out on infinity, an infinite amount of joy and happiness, and that you could potentially have an infinite experience of pain and suffering. Because of that, it is worth considering the question of God's existence, right? So if I said to you, for example, I said to you, look, there's this great investment opportunity. You put £50 in, right, and you get £1 million in 2 years, right? You would kind of consider looking at the email, right? You'd probably consider it, just look into it, just out of curiosity, right? I'm saying read the email about God. That's a good reason. I think that would persuade someone to consider, not to show that God exists, because what you're talking about has been criticised by philosophers. Voltaire said that this Pascal's wager, just one second, I'll come with you. Pascal's wager was a childlike argument, right? But I think placed somewhere else, it's a very, very good argument. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of pick up on this point again, because it's something that theists often throw back in the face of people like us. I actually agree.
Are you an atheist? When you say us, just so I understand what you're talking about.
Well, a lot of people on this table are members of humanist atheist sectors and agnostic society at the university.
You had me fooled, brother. I knew you're one of us. I'm not praying behind you. Yeah. That was a joke, by the way.
I really want to clear this up because I actually I agree with Adam when he says that, you know, the technicality, one cannot be 100% atheist. By nature of the fact, we cannot provide evidence for the non-existence of God. But on the same token, nobody in here can provide evidence for the non-existence of a unicorn, because if unicorns didn't exist, there'd be no evidence which should show that to be the case. So if we imagine somebody who says, I do not believe in unicorns being a unicornist, I'm sure most of, well, I hope most of you in here are a unicornist. On a pure technicality, you actually have to be an agnostic with respect to that. That doesn't mean that's a weak position. And an example of that would be if we talk about something like science, if we talk about objective evidence which shows that the Earth is flat, there is a possibility, an infinitely small possibility, that every one of our instrumentations, every one of our objective measurements, every one of our pictures taken of the Earth as a round sphere happened to have accumulation of all of its error bars to give us the wrong conclusion every single time, and that the Earth is in fact flat. Now that's a possibility, but it's an extremely small possibility. So nobody really in their right mind in this room would not call that a fact. They wouldn't say, well, that's kind of a theory, but only on a technicality.
Sorry, Susan.
So you would agree then?
So what I'm trying to get at is that when somebody says they're an atheist...
I got it.
You know,
so what you're saying is that, that you're agreeing that you can't really be an atheist.
In 100% uncertain terms, no, you cannot. But only in exactly the same sense that you cannot, in 100% uncertain terms, be a unicornist.
What? Okay, forget about the unicorn, but you can't be an atheist.
What atheist?
Hold on, wait a minute. Since you asked me a yes and no answer, I'm going to ask you a yes and no question. So you're saying that you cannot technically be an atheist?
In pure,
yes or
pure
no?
linguistic
Yes or no?
terms,
Just yes or
no.
Okay,
No.
great. Okay, good. We agree. That's really good. Now, just going... Sorry, I will come back to your promise. Okay, great. Now, going back to the point about the unicorns, the analogy is false one to say that that is the same as believing in God. I know it's a kind of clever technique by many atheists. That's a false one. Why? Because for the reason of God, we also have positive arguments for his existence. It is not the case that we don't have no evidence to disprove God, but we also have positive arguments for God's existence, i.e., the transcendent cause of the origin of the universe, objective morality, the contingent existence of the universe, right? We have like 24 arguments for the existence of God. So, if you're saying that you can't be an atheist by definition, good, I'm with you, that means the neutral position is agnosticism, but then if you're encountered with the positive arguments for God, then you should be a theist.
That makes the assumption that to admit that one has to be technically agnostic puts somebody right in the middle of absolute theism and absolute atheism, and that's not the case. So,
sorry, what was that? Sorry, if you could talk this way.
Again, that makes the assumption that to admit that one has to be technically agnostic puts you right slap in the middle of absolute atheism and absolute theism. And
no,
that's wrong.
You could be, let's say, agnosticism here, and just slightly to the left, to theism.
So we have a scale. What we have is a scale. We have a scale.
You have a rational scale.
Of belief. We have absolute theism, which, given God is immaterial and cannot be absolutely proven by empirical means, is an impossibility. And exactly the same technicality, really. That.
So what was that last point that you just made?
We have a scale.
No, about the physicality. But empirical evidence. What does that mean?
One cannot be purely theistic.
Why not?
Because to be purely theistic, you would have to have empirical evidence.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Look, you see scientism coming out of the woodworks. You see, again, you just committed that crime of scientism. Who said to you that, I mean, I sort of debunked that in my presentation, that scientism, logical positivism, empiricism, is a faulty knowledge, theory of knowledge. And again, you still hold on to that. Who said to you that empiricism is the only form of knowledge? Richard Dawkins.
If you take away the...
I mean, come on, let's be sensible about this, right? You have to just be objective for a second. You're holding on to things which give you conclusions, but you have no right to hold on to them. And it's rooted, I really do believe in this kind of empiricistic kind of worldview, that all that's true is what you can touch and see and feel. There are truths that are, for example, Kant spoke about them, synthetic truths. There's a whole discussion about what truth is. this idea that it's just the empirical world, let's focus. This is abandoned many, many years ago, and you're still holding on to it. And that's why you're not getting what I'm saying. I'm just saying, just put that aside for a second. Look, you admitted that atheism is not technically possible. You admitted that.
Yes.
Actually, it is possible if you can show that God is a contradiction. Like you can be an atheist about squared circles, right?
But so if God's omnipotent and omniscient, then he's a square circle.
For example, you could, if that was a contradiction, you could.
Which it is. Logically, that's
no, it's not. No,
in the same way that square circles are contradiction.
No, it's not. I would ask you to show. No. How is that a contradiction?
Well, in the same sense that if he's omnipotent and is able to do absolutely anything, and if he's omniscient and knows absolutely everything, is he able to change his mind about something? Because if he knows,
why would he change his mind?
Because he wanted to.
He's omniscient. No. Well, by the way,
that's the point.
No. It's not determinism. Just relax for a second. See, this is a problem. You're jumping all over the place, right? Just 1 second. Let's take this step by step, right? I do actually give a course on this, and maybe one day we'll set it up and you can come and join and poke holes in it or whatever. But okay, listen to what you're saying. He's all-knowing, and then he's going to change his mind. That's a contradiction. Your dichotomy is a contradiction. That doesn't even exist. If he is all-knowing, then why would he change his mind?
That's what I'm saying.
But I never said he would change his mind.
But if he's unable to change his mind, if it's not possible
what do you mean?
to change his mind because he's omniscient.
No, you're asking here, when you're saying is he able to change his mind, that is a logical contradiction. It doesn't make sense what you're saying. It's like saying, can God create a squared circle? That doesn't make sense. You're asking gibbledygook.
You could get your cows go to. You couldn't just like.
Listen, Descartes. You need to hold on, man. You're on another level. You're not even here. I'm going to ignore you. Just play. That's a circle.
But what is it? It's square.
No. Okay. So what is that? Oh my God! He's won them over. We've lost them. Okay. So going. That's not a contradiction, by the way. In any shape of the term, in any sense of the term, there's not a contradiction in any way because you're assuming certain things in your premises which need to be justified. Whatever happens after this lecture, I've got nothing to do with it. Okay, so going back to the gentleman over here. What was your name, sorry? Tom. So Tom believes that atheism is not a tenable position, and technically you can't be an atheist. And you know what? If that's the best that I can get out today, I'm happy with that. Right?
But that's
you can't be an atheist.
empiricism, which you disagree with.
The onus is on you to prove empiricism.
No, but I'm just saying you disagree with empiricism, with the idea of that. And it's only based on empiricism that we say things like it's impossible to be an absolute atheist in the same way.
No, you can use logic to show that something doesn't exist. I don't have to search the entire world to see if there's a squared circle, and then I conclude there's no such thing as a squared circle. I use logic and reason to determine that there's no. If I said, for example, I said, right, first one to find the squared circle in this lecture hall wins £1 million. Would anyone bother getting up? No. What are you doing? It's not good, Mike.
Thank you for the talk, it's very interesting.
Thank you.
To me, if you can be a 100% theist, and this may be based on my basic understanding, but why can you then not extend that to more than one? Why can you not extend that to pantheism?
That's a very good question. Very, very good question. Now, by the way, I don't say that I'm a 100% theist. I say that I have more reasons to believe in God than not to believe in God. Right? It's not a proof, because it's not a mathematical proof. I believe in God because there's more reasons to believe in God, not to believe in God. Okay. The reason that there's two answers to this question. If I just purely use reason, again, I would use Occam's razor. If one God can cause the universe, then why would I postulate many gods? Yeah? Then there's the theological explanation. As a Muslim, I have the Quran, and the Quran stipulates there's only one God, right? Which itself, but the basis of me adhering to what the Quran says is also a rational argument underpinning that. I don't have arguments for that. Time to go into the arguments for that. It's another lecture in itself. But in short, that's the answer. Occam's razor. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, that's the end, guys. Can we just show some appreciation for Alan, please?